How long can a criminal empire thrive before it all comes crashing down? How long before the walls close in and the police finally dismantle the ruthless power behind it? In cities across the world, elite task forces are formed to wage war on gangs, but some syndicates, like the infamous Bestwood Cartel, seem untouchable, until they aren't. This is the story of Colin Gunn, the man who thought his empire was invincible, and the shocking fall that no one saw coming. Sometimes, it takes the community to stand up, or for the police to do their jobs, for a specific gang to crumble, especially when they take things extremely far or too far, to the point where it's no longer tolerated. Now, Colin Gunn is a name that most people won't recognize, but he is one of the most notorious crime bosses from England, specifically Nottingham, and the community of Bestwood, where he and his brother David grew up. Both men, from a young age, had an intimidating presence and started causing trouble in the community by intimidating local businesses to pay protection money. And if you know how gangs work, most times you're literally paying them not to rob you, as opposed to someone else, since they're the ones who usually operate in these communities, doing wrong and often having a hand in most things. Gunn's criminal influence was also present in other communities like Bulwell and Arnold, mainly because his brother David moved to Bulwell in 2001. The police really started monitoring the brothers in 2004 to 2005 before they eventually got arrested. But how and why they got arrested, or even got on the police radar, is shocking and downright evil. Nottingham, in the early 2000s, was a relatively stable environment before gang violence flared up. Of course, there were underlying social issues. Factors such as poverty, unemployment, and lack of opportunities for the youth led to a sense of denial and acceptance among young people. The Bestwood estate, where Colin Gunn operated, was known to be a tight-knit community, but things started to shift with the increasing violence and drug-related crimes. The man at the top during these years was Colin Gunn, who had a reputation for being highly feared by dealers, addicts, and even suppliers in his drug empire. As with drugs and most other criminal activities, there was always competition, and rival gangs and the Gunn's Bestwood Cartel were constantly at odds. These gang wars led to an increase in violence in the community, so much so that Nottingham earned the nickname Gun City, or the more catchy Shottingham. The Gunn brothers were never ones to shy away from any challenge or taking revenge when one of their own was taken out, but sometimes you take it too far when you start feeling too smart or immortal, and one could say that's exactly what happened with Gunn. In the early years before the 2000s, the Gunn brothers were just hassling local shopkeepers and other businesses for money by pointing out perceived weaknesses in their security and offering their services for a so-called fee. As in the movies, if the owners resisted, their businesses would often get burglarized or vandalized shortly after Gunn paid them a visit. As their reputation grew, so did their tactics and the severity of those tactics. The deeper they got into organized crime, the more aggressive and violent their methods became. They had no limits, engaging in everything from intimidation schemes to orchestrating violent crimes, including murders. These were mainly to eliminate rivals of their gang or to intimidate opposing football teams. There is even a record of them putting a pig's head in a rival team's locker room to intimidate them into losing against the team Gunn supported. It was in August of 2004 when Gunn completely lost the plot. An elderly couple was killed in cold blood, simply for being related to someone who was a rival of the Gunn brothers. Most would say the rapid fall of the Bestwood Cartel began with the murder of Joan and John Stirland, an innocent couple who became victims of gang violence. The Stirlands weren't the type of people to be involved in organized crime. John was a retired electrician, and Joan was a former nurse. Both lived quiet, peaceful lives. However, Joan was the mother of Michael O'Brien, a son from a previous marriage who was involved with a rival gang of Colin Gunn. Michael was always in trouble with the law, but nothing that caused the Stirlands to worry about their safety. However, his murder of Marvin Bradshaw set off a chain reaction that led to the death of his mother and stepfather. Bradshaw was a friend of Colin Gunn's nephew, Jamie Gunn. After the death of his friend, Jamie turned to substances to cope and died shortly afterward from pneumonia. Colin, however, solely blamed Michael O'Brien for his nephew's death and stated that the bullet was meant for Jamie. He couldn't let that go. Michael was in jail for the murder, and the only way Colin saw to make a statement was to go after the Stirlands. The Stirlands fled Nottingham and moved to Lincolnshire for their safety, where they were assigned a police liaison for protection. However, a police misjudgment eventually led to their deaths. On August 8, 2004, Mrs. Stirland reported to her liaison that a man was hiding in the bushes around their property. This call was made at 2 p.m., but was never properly communicated to the Lincolnshire Police Department, who didn't visit the Stirlands until 9:30 p.m. that night, which was too late. 2 men had entered the Stirlands' property and opened fire, killing John first in the living room, and then Joan, who was in the bedroom. The men escaped in a getaway car, which they later ditched and burned, switching over to another vehicle. The killing left the community in shock. Many suspected who was responsible, but without direct evidence at the time, the police couldn't act on taking down Colin Gunn. He had built a multi-million-dollar empire and was alleged to have police officers on his payroll. It was believed that this is how he obtained the location of the Stirlands and arranged their murders. With the Stirland Murders, a big target was placed on Colin Gunn's back, and the police launched a detailed and thorough investigation into his criminal empire. They were able to wiretap his phones to monitor his calls and set up proper surveillance on him. They also acquired informants and had undercover police officers infiltrate the Bestwood Cartel crime gang. This allowed them to gather enough evidence and information to secure a conviction for his role in the murders of John and Joan Stirland. The investigation also exposed corrupt cops, which weakened his network and attempts to cover up his involvement in the murders and other criminal activities. Colin Gunn was sentenced to a minimum of 35 years in prison after his trial in 2006, with the charge being conspiracy to murder. Even behind bars, he was handed an additional 9-year sentence for bribery of 2 police officers and conspiracy to corrupt. Colin Gunn would stop at nothing for control and power. While it is good that he is off the streets, the community's trust in the law was severely shaken due to the corruption revealed in this case. As a result, the police department had to work hard to regain that trust through various initiatives. The Stirlands didn't deserve what happened to them. We hope their family received some sense of justice, and we keep them in our thoughts. Let's all look out for each other in this world and try to be good to our neighbors. Greed only takes you so far in the world of crime.